Welcome back to part 4 of our Dunamis series. In this series, we have been exploring the prophetic potential of the Seventh-day Adventist integrated health and gospel work. We have also been exploring God's original plan for this work and how we deviated from that plan. And also, we will explore God's plan to get us back in harmony with His original design. Okay, so in part 4 of this series, we will talk more about God's original plan for Loma Linda. And in part 4, we'll set the stage for answering the question that we've been seeking to answer throughout this 6-part series. So before we get to our question, let's go ahead and begin the way we always begin by looking at the quotes that tell of the prophetic potential of this work. All right. So in Counsels on Health, page 215, we read the following. God has qualified his people to enlighten the world. He has entrusted them with faculties by which they are to extend his work until it shall encircle the globe. In all parts of the earth, they are to establish sanitariums, schools, publishing houses, and kindred facilities for the accomplishment of his work. All right, in pamphlet 49, page 10, we read the following. A time will come when medical missionaries of other denominations will become jealous and envious of the influence exerted by Seventh-day Adventists who are working in these lines. They will feel that influence is being secured by our workers, which they ought to have. And finally, in Counsels on Health 393, we read the following. It says, "It is the Lord's purpose that his method of healing without drugs shall be brought into prominence in every large city through our medical institutions." So, looking at these quotations, looking at God's original plan, it kind of led us to a question. And the question that we were led to was, since this was God's original purpose, why do Seventh-day Adventists not have an enviable, prominent, worldwide presence in effective drugless healing today? And in our quest to answer this question, we have looked at the history of our work. In part 1, we looked at a few things that hinder God from doing what he wants to do through us. In part 2, we looked at the health message, and we also talked about a little bit about the Western Health Reform Institute, which later became the Battle Creek Sanitarium. In part 3, we talked more about the Battle Creek Sanitarium. We talked about the conflict that arose there with Dr. Kellogg, and we also talked more about the Seventh-day Adventist educational work on a broader scale. And now in part 4, we will talk more about God's original plan for Loma Linda. Okay, so let's get started. As a recap from part 3, we saw that a sanitarium and college were started in Battle Creek for the purpose of treating the sick with minimal drugs, training workers to attend to physical, mental, and spiritual needs, combining the three angels' messages and the medical work, and teaching people right methods of living. We also saw that the physiologic method at Battle Creek used rational therapies to address the causes of disease instead of just treating symptoms. And we saw that there were disagreements between the ministerial brethren and Dr. Kellogg. We saw that Ellen White saw the danger that was coming, and she advised people to decentralize the work in Battle Creek and to stop sending their children there. So she said, hey, instead of this huge sanitarium, we need to have multiple smaller plants outside of every large city, actually. And so God was sending light that we needed to decentralize, but the people were hesitant or reluctant to follow that light because the school was there, the sanitarium was there, and they wanted to be close to those institutions. Then we saw that the Review and Herald building and the sanitarium burned down in 1902, removing the main objections to leaving Battle Creek. We saw that we talked about how eventually the sanitarium was rebuilt, and so the decentralization did not actually happen like it should have. We talked about the fact that Kellogg taught dangerous pantheistic theories from 1897 to 1903 when he published The Living Temple, and he continued to espouse those beliefs, leading to Ellen White eventually stating that she had lost confidence in him. And we also talked about E.A. Sutherland, P.T. McGann, and Miss Bessie DeGraw. We talked about how they eventually started Madison Missionary College in Tennessee, and that it became a model school that combined entrepreneurship and ministry. All right, so that's our recap from part 3. Now let's go ahead and get started with this, the content from for part 4. All right, so we have been going through story time as I shared earlier in a previous episode. And so now we are at God's original plan for Loma Linda. So that's where we are now in the grand scheme of things, okay? All right, so in Special Testimony Series B, page 13, we read the following. It says, "The Lord has ordained that memorials for him shall be established in many places. He has presented before me buildings away from the cities and suitable for our work, which can be purchased at a low price. We must take advantage of the favorable openings for sanitarium work in Southern California, where the climate is so favorable for this work." So here we see that the Lord was revealing to Sister White that we needed to purchase sanitariums away from the cities, and that it was an opportune time for us to do that because we could obtain those properties at low prices. And she mentioned specifically that we needed to do this work in Southern California. Let's continue. It says, "It is the Lord's purpose that sanitariums shall be established in Southern California, and that from these institutions shall go forth the light of truth for this time. By them, the claims of the true Sabbath are to be presented, and the third angel's message proclaimed." So again, we're seeing that this work, this healing work, is to be um, connected, intimately connected with the proclamation of the three angels' messages. All right, and let's finish out the quote. "Institutions in which medical missionary work can be done are to be regarded as especially essential to the advancement of the Lord's work. The sick and suffering are to be relieved, and then, as opportunity offers, they are to be given instruction in regard to the truth for this time. Thus, we can bring present truth before a class of people who could be reached in no other way." So here we're seeing that these are people, the people who will come to our institutions of healing are people that wouldn't necessarily respond to an evangelistic series or any of our purely gospel oriented outreach or evangelistic endeavors. But by engaging in this work and intimately connecting the health work, the work of healing that the Lord desires to do through us with the proclamation of the three angels' messages, we will be able to place present truth before people, like the truth for this time before the people that come there. And this is how the Lord ordained that this work should operate. All right, let's continue. In pamphlet 94, page 25, we read the following. It says, "I am much encouraged by the letters that I have received from you regarding Loma Linda. From your descriptions of this place, I believe it meets the representation which I have seen of what we should seek for as sanitarium locations. Such a place was presented to me a few miles from an important city. The city had recently been built up. So I believe this letter was addressed to John Burden, who was the business director of Loma Linda once it was started. I know that John Burden was communicating with Sister White and telling her, about the property, and which is why I believe that this letter was addressed to him. And here we see that she's saying, "Hey, I believe this meets the representation which the Lord has shown me. Like, I think this is the place that the Lord has told me that we are to have." Okay. And so this is kind of like the beginning of how we acquired Loma Linda. Okay. So let's continue. So this quote here, in this quote, Ellen White is speaking to a physician. I believe it was a female physician that she was trying to recruit to come to Loma Linda. And so here she's describing Loma Linda to this physician. And of course, this is from Daughters of God 100, but we know that's a compilation. So this is not where it was originally written. This is just where I copied the text from. Okay, so let's go ahead and read it. It says, "I have recently spent 2 weeks at Loma Linda. I am sending you a booklet that will give you some idea of the property. The large main building is furnished in an expensive manner. There are also 5 cottages, one having 9 rooms, the others 4 each. In some of these, the verandas are so arranged that beds can be rolled out from the rooms. The grounds are beautifully laid out. There are concrete walks rather, between all of the buildings. It says, these walks are bordered with flowers. There is a good orchard and ample grounds for gardens. There are many eucalyptus, pepper trees, and many other varieties of ornamental trees and shrubbery. Meetings can be held in the open air of the beautiful lawns. There is also another building that has been used as a bowling alley and billiard hall. This can be utilized as a meeting house. So here we see that she is emphasizing the beauty of the grounds, which we know has a therapeutic effect. And she's also emphasizing the ability of the people to spend time in the open air. So she said, hey, the beds can be rolled out, people can spend time outside, and we can have meetings on the lawn. And this is really a place that would promote healing. Okay, so let's continue. This is a picture of Sister White at the Loma Linda dedication. I like this picture, so I put it in here just so you could see. And you can see in the background the building there, kind of what Loma Linda looked like around that time. All right, and so this is pamphlet 49, page 9, Loma Linda's work. Let's read it. At Loma Linda, there is to come to the physicians and to the teachers new ideas, a new understanding of the principles that must govern the medical work. An education is to be given that is altogether in harmony with the teachings of the Word of God. It is a lack of faith in the power of God that leads our physicians to lean so much upon the arm of the law and to trust so much to the influence of worldly powers. So here, at the beginning of this work, she is stating that the Lord is to give us new ideas and a new understanding of how we are to do this work, how we are to do the work that He has entrusted us with. She says that the education that we give to the students here are to be completely in harmony, 100% in harmony with the Word of God. And we are not to rely on the arm of the law for our influence or for our ability to do this work. God will give us influence, and God is the one who will make the path straight before us as we engage in this work. Now, this is going to be important. So we're going to continue throughout the presentations, but you'll see this theme being repeated, that we should not lean so much upon the arm of the law as we seek to do this work. God will give us influence. We'll see this theme come up again and again. So let's continue. Pamphlet 49, page 2. It says, with the possession of this place comes the weighty responsibility of making the work of the institution educational in character. A school is to be established here for the training of gospel, medical, missionary evangelists. Much is involved in this work, and it is very essential that a right beginning be made. It will take some time to get a right understanding of the matter. But just as soon as we begin to work in the line of true reform, the Holy Spirit will lead us and guide us, if we are willing to be guided. So essentially, we're seeing here that from its inception, this was to be a place of education. Okay, Loma Linda was to be a place where students were educated in harmony with the Word of God, we saw previously, and that we were to train here gospel, medical, missionary evangelists. This is the main purpose for which this school was founded. All right, let's continue. Now we're staying in pamphlet 49. We're going to page 9. It says, Loma Linda has been specified to me as a very important place and one which demands the best Bible teacher that we can supply. There are promising youth who are to be qualified to fill important positions in this work. They should have the best class of instructors and capable Bible teachers who understand the truths of the Word. The truth and righteousness revealed in the Word of God is to be the stronghold of our workers. So again, the school is to have a biblical foundation. So we see that again and again. Let's continue. All right, what were the students to be taught at the Loma Linda College of Medical Evangelists? So now we're going to go into the subjects that were taught at Loma Linda in its early days. This is Loma Linda Messages, page 427, and this is W.C. White, the son of Ellen White, speaking. So he says, Jesus said at one time, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do, but do not ye after their works. Now, the law says that a man shall not practice medicine unless he has a diploma from a college, and unless he has passed the examination of the state board and has a certificate. The law would not recognize the diplomas of our physicians unless they have studied some things that we do not think are really essential. So here we see that they are reasoning in the early days as they're starting Loma Linda up, and they're saying, hey, the law requires us to do these things. So we're going to go ahead and do them, but we're also going to do it in our way. Let's see what he said. Let's continue. It says, for instance, in their preparation, they have to study a number of things that we think they might get along without, but we can teach them. Okay. It says, we do not have to teach these subjects in their way. We can teach them in our way. When it comes to the study of drugs, they teach how to give them. We teach the dangers of using them and how to get along without them. In some other schools, they teach geology on the evolution basis. We can teach geology and show that evolution is false. Okay, so this to me is so important. So, yes, I put it in here because I wanted to point out the things that they learned at Loma Linda. And we see here that they studied pharmacology, but they also studied how to um, help people without using drug medication, or potentially if they're already taking medicine, how to help them get off of medicine. This is me kind of applying it to our day. Um, but I want to just emphasize the importance of that, because so many times there are healthcare professionals who recognize that using drug medication is not necessarily the best way um, to address disease. However, if you don't know what else to do, then your hands are still tied. You see what I'm saying? And so I thought it was so important that at Loma Linda in the early days, they not only taught that we need to educate away from drugs, but they taught what to do instead, how to address disease without using pharmaceutical therapeutics. Okay. And this is so important because I don't know that there is a Seventh-day Adventist institution that is teaching this today. I know these are things that I learned in naturopathic medical school, but I also know that I learned a whole lot of things that were not in harmony with God's original, God's heaven ordained method of healing at the same time. So, this to me is a problem. Like, I really believe that we need to kind of go back to the foundation of how our work began, how our educational work, and specifically our medical educational work began, and start teaching how to get along without the use of drugs again. Okay, but I digress. This is not what this is about. This is about the subjects that were taught at Loma Linda. So let's continue. Okay, this is Loma Linda Messages, page 23. And it says the following. Speaking of the laboratory, Dr. Rubel said, this building is perfectly adapted to the purposes for which it was constructed, thanks to the counsel of those who knew what they needed and have worked to produce it. Already, courses have been conducted in the respective laboratory rooms in histology, embryology, bacteriology, chemistry, and materia medica. Just the apparatus for these courses that was required has been provided. So here we already saw that they learned clinical sciences, and now we're seeing that they also study the basic sciences at Loma Linda in its early days. All right, let's continue. Loma Linda Messages, page 24. It says the following. If the College of Medical Evangelists has any mission, scientifically and medically, it is in emphasizing and advancing physiologic therapeutics. Of all departments in the school, this one should be the best equipped. If we are to educate away from drug medication, it must be by demonstrating a better way of treatment. Provision must be made that will enable us to secure the best possible results in the treatment of disease. And I love this quote so much. So here we're reading about the scientific and medical mission of the Loma Linda College of Health Evangelists, and we're seeing that it was to understand how to treat the sick without drugs and to become better and better in doing so. Okay? This this is the foundational scientific and medical mission of this school. Okay, so we see that this is the reason, the main scientific reason for which the school was started, to learn and to teach how to educate away from drug medication and how to become better and better as we do that. And it states, that this should be the best equipped department in the school. Okay, so this is going back to what we were just talking about. This is so important. It's so important. It's not enough to just say, hey, pharmaceutical medications are not necessarily the best way to treat disease. We have to show a better way. We have to show a better way. This is this is what God ordained that we would do through our medical education. All right, let's continue. Pamphlet 49, page 9. It says the education that meets the world standard is to be less and less valued by those who are seeking for efficiency in carrying the medical missionary work in connection with the work of the third angel's message. They are to be educated from the standpoint of conscience. Okay. And here we're going to, before I move on to the next page, I want you to just pay really close attention to what this quote says. Okay. First of all, so we saw that our workers, the people who are trained at our school, are to be educated from the standpoint of conscience. Educated from a standpoint of conscience in doing what? Let's see. As they conscientiously and faithfully follow right methods in their treatment of the sick, these methods will come to be recognized as preferable to the methods of nursing to which many have become accustomed, which demand the use of poisonous drugs. So here we are seeing this is a promise. I take this as a promise. It says, as we do this work, as we conscientiously and faithfully follow the right methods in the treatment of the sick, God will give us influence, and our methods will come to be recognized as preferable to conventional medical treatment. This is what this says. Okay, so this is, and I mentioned that we would be talking more about looking to God for our recognition and for our influence, and not so much leaning on the arm of the law. We mentioned that earlier, but this is essentially the promise that as we engage in this work, God will give us influence. Our work will come to be recognized as preferable. Okay, so this is important to keep in mind. Let's continue. So we've talked about God's original plan for Loma Linda, and now we are finally at the denominational dilemma. So this is where we're going to see that, as before I go too much in depth, I'm just going to let you know that as they were starting Loma Linda, there were a few things that the people who were involved didn't necessarily agree on. They didn't necessarily understand what would be the best way to put the counsel that we had received into action. Okay, put it into play. Like, how do we practically apply what we are being told through the ministry of Sister White? Okay, this is the question that they were seeking to answer. And so, as we'll see, Ellen White stated that a great test was upon our people at that time, and that the decision that we made would have long-standing effects. So let's go ahead and look into the denominational dilemma. Okay. Pamphlet 61, page 24. We read the following. There are some who may not be able to see that here is a test as to whether we shall put our dependence on man or upon God. Shall we by our course seem to acknowledge that there is a stronger power with the unbelievers than there is with God's own people? When we take hold upon God and trust in Him, He will work in our behalf. But we are to stand distinct and separate from the world. So, I mentioned before that this would come up again and again. Do we lean on the arm of the law, or do we trust God to move this work forward? And here is where this question came to a head. And here we see that Ellen White is saying that this is a test, and essentially we need God to help us make the right decision. Okay, so let's continue so that we understand a little bit more about the potential impact of the decisions that were on the table. Okay. Pamphlet 61, page 23, it says, as God's peculiar people, we should not feel that we must acknowledge our dependence upon the transgressors of God's law to give us influence in the world. It is God that gives us influence. He will give us advantages that are far above all the advantages that we can receive from worldlings. Amen. Okay. Loma Linda Messages, page 5, it says, As early as December 10th, 1905, and here we are getting into the content of the dilemma, all right? As early as December 10th, 1905, Sister White had written to Elder and Mrs. Burden. In regard to the school, I would say make it all you possibly can in the education of nurses and physicians. But it was difficult for us to grasp at once a clear comprehension of the magnitude of the work to be accomplished in the training of medical missionaries for the worldwide work. All could not see alike as to how much might be involved in the training of physicians. So here we see that Ellen White said, yes, at this school, she mentioned in other places, at this school we are to train gospel medical missionary workers, but we are also to train nurses and physicians. And I want you to make it all you possibly can in the education of nurses and physicians. And so, taking that counsel, the people who were making the decisions, they were really trying to figure out, how do we put this into practice? How do we make this practical? Okay. So as they were um, planning out how to implement, they kind of came into a roadblock. They couldn't quite understand. Different people had different opinions, and we'll see what some of those opinions were. It says, some felt that we could not hope successfully to give a complete medical course. Others thought that we might give a special course that would enable our students to be recognized as practitioners of some system of healing, as are DOs, chiropractors, so osteopaths, chiropractors, etc. While others thought that we might give 2 or 3 years of the medical course, sending the students to some other institution to complete their medical studies, where they might be granted degrees. Okay? So essentially, they were at a crossroads. They had to decide how the school was to operate. And their options were, number one, do nothing at all, since we cannot possibly hope to start a complete medical school. Number two, offer some of the courses required for a medical degree and send students to a secular university to finish their training. Number three, start a special program that would enable our students to be recognized as practitioners of a new system of healing outside of allopathic medicine, such as osteopathic medicine or chiropractic medicine, something of that nature. And number four, do whatever it takes to start and run a complete medical school. So we're going to go through each of these options, and we're going to see whether or not, whether there's counsel for or against any of these options. So let's start with option number one, do nothing at all, since we cannot possibly hope to start a complete medical school. All right, in Counsels on Health 233, we read the following. Loma Linda is to be not only a sanitarium, but an educational center. With the possession of this place comes the weighty responsibility of making the work of this institution educational in character. A school is to be established here for the training of gospel, medical, missionary evangelists. So here we see, and we've read this quote before, here we see that not doing anything, not having any school at all, wasn't really a viable option. We had already been told that it was God's will for a school to be established there. Okay, so we crossed that option off. Now let's continue. Let's look at another option. Counsels to Parents, Teachers, and Students, page 480. It says, and not only should our larger training schools give this preparatory instruction to those who contemplate taking a medical course, but we must also do all that is essential for the perfecting of the courses of study offered by our Loma Linda College of Medical Evangelists. We must provide that which is essential to qualify our youth who desire to be physicians so that they may intelligently fit themselves to stand the examinations required to prove their efficiency as physicians. Okay, so here she says, we don't need to send our students to any other schools. Everything that they need, we should be able to do. Okay? They should be taught to treat understandingly the cases of those who are diseased, so that the door will be closed for any sensible physician to imagine that we are not giving in our school the instruction necessary for properly qualifying young men and women to do the work of a physician. Continually, the students who are graduated are to advance in knowledge, for practice makes perfect. Okay, so here we see that Ellen White was not, based on the light she had received, she was not in favor of sending our students to a secular university to finish up their medical training. Okay, and we'll read a little bit more about that now. This is Ellen White, Woman of Vision by Arthur Lacey White, page 518. All right, it says, step by step, the counsels given by Ellen White seem to be leading to a medical school fully recognized for the training given to physicians. Measures were taken with the view in mind that at Loma Linda, 1 or 2 years of medical studies would be given, which might be accepted by a recognized medical college as part of a regular medical course. It seemed that the next step would be the securing of a charter that would give such work acceptance. Okay, so here we see that someone had advanced this idea. How about we just do some of the training and then send them somewhere else? And so the next step would be to go ahead and get a charter so that they could start doing that work. But here we'll see what Ellen White said. It says, Elder Burden, on September 20th, 1909, counseled with Ellen White at her home about this. He found that she was distressed with any plan that called for having medical students take some work at Loma Linda and then get the finishing touches of their education from some worldly institution. She exclaimed, God forbid that such a plan should be followed, and commented, I must state that the light I have received is that we are to stand as a distinct commandment-keeping people. So here we see, again, that she was not in harmony based on the light she had received with the idea of giving some of our training at Loma Linda and then sending our graduate or our students out to get the finishing touches, as she termed it, of their education elsewhere. Okay, so that makes option number 2 not really a viable option. Okay, let's go ahead and look at another option. Okay, this is pamphlet 49, page 9. We should not at this time seek to compete with worldly medical schools. Should we do this, our chances of success would be small. We are not now prepared to carry out successfully the work of establishing large medical institutions of learning. Moreover, should we follow the world's method of medical practice, exacting the large fees that worldly physicians demand for their services, we should work away from Christ's plan for our ministry to the sick. Okay, so here we see that Ellen White is saying that we should not at this time compete with worldly medical schools. So um, I ended up crossing off do whatever it takes to start and run a complete medical school, but I also put a question mark next to that because she said we should not at this time. She didn't say that we should never compete with worldly medical schools, but at that time, that wasn't necessarily the ideal route for us to take. So that led to us kind of half crossing out option number 4. But let's look a little bit more closely at option number 3. Start a special program that would enable our students to be recognized as practitioners of a new system of healing outside of allopathic medicine, such as the DOs and the DCs. Okay? So in order to take a closer look at option number 3, we're going to read from the General Conference Bulletin, June 3rd, 1909, page 293. Now, what we're going to read here is going to give us so much insight into the decision-making process that took place again in around 1909 when Loma Linda was being started up. Okay, so let's go ahead and read. Whereas our field is the world, and the legal requirements for medical qualification in many countries demand a literary and scientific knowledge of a high order and necessitate a thorough mastery of the medical curriculum. Therefore, resolution number 36, we recommend that those qualifying for medical practice secure such preliminary and medical education as is accepted in this country and abroad. So here, essentially what's happening is they're still trying to determine what type of education they are going to provide at Loma Linda. And this is specifically about the idea of sending the students out to secular universities so that they get the finishing touches of their education there and are recognized by the laws in other countries as having received a substantial medical education. And the reason they're discussing this is because again, our field is the world, and Loma Linda was to train students who would go out and integrate the three angels' messages with the God's method, God's true method of healing, and they were to be medical missionary evangelists in the United States, yes, but also in foreign countries. So this is why they're having this discussion, and we actually get insight into this discussion. So let's go ahead and read. Okay, this is W.A. Rubel speaking, and this is what he says. He says, "You will notice that this resolution states, whereas our field is the world, and the legal requirements for medical qualification in many countries demand a literary and scientific knowledge of a high order, etc." He says, "Many of our young people desire to take the medical course, but in planning for that, they often forget to plan with a view to the possibility of taking up work in a country outside of the United States. Some are so anxious to secure a medical degree that they are taking some shorter courses, or possibly 2 or 3 years, or in some instances of even only a few months, so as to get some kind of a degree. I think this is to be deplored because it is depriving all such of the opportunity of going to some foreign field at some future time." So we see that W.A. Rubel was in harmony with the idea of sending our students out to another school so that they could be eventually recognized, not only in the United States but in the global work. Okay. He says such persons will find it impossible to practice in any country outside of the United States. He says the requirements of medical examiners in foreign lands are such as require the most thorough preparation to meet. For this reason, those students who anticipate being called to practice in any other land must necessarily take their work in the best of our American universities in order to meet, in some instances, even the entrance requirements of universities abroad. Wow. In these foreign countries, the physician must have legal recognition. It is necessary also that our medical students take their studies in some school that is recognized by the universities abroad. In view of all these circumstances, I hope that we will not plan to limit the usefulness of those who expect to qualify as physicians, but that we will raise our sight in this respect and aim higher in the medical work. We must not tie the hands of our youth by giving to them an education that will not stand the test in these countries, where they may afterward be called to labor. Our field is the world, and we have a worldwide medical missionary work to do. Our physicians must have thorough training, a training that will be recognized by governmental authorities in all these lands. So here he is highlighting the need for recognition so as not to hinder the work that we are doing in presenting the health work and the three angels messages in the global field. And so let's go ahead and see what John Burden says. John Burden says, "I would like to ask the literal meaning of the phrase, those qualifying for medical practice." And then W.A. Rubel says, "It means those who shall receive legal permission to practice medicine in these countries." Now, here's what Burden says. He says, "It seems to me that there will be some confusion unless there is something clearer on that point. If we give much heed to what was said yesterday morning from the desk, it seems to me it is going to cause considerable confusion for us to pass this resolution just as it reads." Now, why is that, John Burden? Let's see. It says, "It was stated yesterday that the worldly medical education is to be esteemed less and less by those who are seeking for efficiency in carrying the medical work, whatever that may be. And now, if we, by the passing of this resolution, turn the minds of all our young people who are interested in medical work to the thought of securing worldly recognition, it seems to me it will result in confusion. I recognize the point in the resolution, and certainly there seems need for counsel, but I cannot see the harmony between the resolution and the counsel that was given yesterday morning." Okay? So essentially what is happening here is W.A. Rubel is saying, hey, we need to make sure that our graduates are top tier. We need to send them out to the best American universities so that their work is not hindered when they go to these other countries. He says, we see that they're already doing things that's going to hedge up their way. They're going and they're getting education for just a few months or a couple of years here or there. And it's really like making it difficult for them to um, work anywhere other than the United States. So we need to do something to address this issue. And now John Burden is saying, hey, I see what you're saying. I understand that if they are to go to other countries, then they will need to be recognized as providers of the healing art in those other countries. However, I just can't reconcile the idea of telling all of our young people that they need to go to the best American universities, secular universities at that, to secure the education that they need in order to work for God. Okay. He says, I'm having a difficult time reconciling that. And we need to understand what we're really and truly saying before we put this resolution out and confuse the minds of all of our young people. Now let's see what R.S. Owen says. We're not going to read all of what he says, but what he says here is really key. And I want you to pay attention to the first part. So they're having this discussion, Rubel and Burden, and R.S. Owen speaks up and he says the following. He says, I believe that the testimonies are calling for something entirely different from that which is outlined in this resolution. I believe they are calling upon us to institute some school that will finally be recognized. So here he's saying, I hear what you're saying, Rubel, but I don't think that's what the testimonies are saying. The testimonies are saying at all. I believe that we are to start a school in harmony with the principles that God has revealed, and our school will finally or eventually be recognized. Does this sound like our option number 3? Start some system of healing that would eventually be recognized. It absolutely does. And we'll come back to R.S. Owen because he actually goes on to do some interesting things as far as like starting this school is concerned. So, but we'll talk about him in a future episode of our Dunamis series. All right, so let's continue. R.S. Owen highlighted that starting a special program that would enable our students to be recognized as practitioners of a new system of healing outside of allopathic medicine, such as at the time, like today we think of DOs as they're just physicians, right? But back in those days, this was completely new. Like A.T. Still had just started this osteopathic medicine thing, and they weren't seen in the same way as MDs back then, okay? And so that actually is interesting because they eventually gained recognition, right? Um, One can only think, I wonder what would have happened had we gone ahead and started our own system of healing that would eventually become recognized. But we know history, and that's not what we chose. We chose to start a fully recognized complete medical school. But again, R.S. Owen was highlighting this option number 3. Okay, let's look a little bit more closely at the option of starting a school that was based on a new system of healing outside of allopathic medicine that would eventually become recognized. Okay. Our scientific mission of emphasizing and advancing physiologic therapeutics, as well as the evangelistic focus of our work, make the line of demarcation clear between Seventh-day Adventists and the world. By creating a new system of healing, such as A.T. Still did with osteopathic medicine, we would have had a better chance of maintaining the evangelistic spirit among our graduates and the fidelity of our work to the Three Angels' messages. We had the promise that our work would be recognized. God would give us influence. However, that's not the step that we took, okay? Let's read those promises again. Testimonies to the Church, Volume 9, page 175. It says, the education that meets the world's standard is to be less and less valued by those who are seeking for efficiency in carrying the medical missionary work in connection with the work of the Three Angels' message. They are to be educated from the standpoint of conscience, And as they conscientiously and faithfully follow right methods in the treatment of disease, these methods will come to be recognized as preferable to the methods to which many have become accustomed, which demand the use of poisonous drugs. All right, and here's another promise that we had. Counsels to parents, teachers, and students, page 476. It says, the light that God has given in medical missionary lines will not cause his people to be regarded as inferior in scientific medical knowledge, but will fit them to stand upon the highest eminence. God would have them stand as a wise and understanding people because of his presence with them. So this is essentially telling us that had we gone, like taken those steps to just follow the word of the Lord, follow his instruction, he would give us influence and our methods would become recognized. They would be viewed as preferable to conventional medicine. We would stand on the highest eminence scientifically and medically because of God's presence with us. Okay, so that was the promise. But we know history, and as we were discussing these matters in 1909, we opted to start a medical school that operated in harmony with the already established principles of allopathic medical education, instead of creating a new system of healing. And then in 1910, medical education in the United States changed drastically. How did it change? With the Flexner Report of 1910. So in 1910, Abraham Flexner was commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation to conduct a landmark report about medical schools in the United States. This report, called Medical Education in the United States and Canada, but commonly referred to as the Flexner Report, highlighted Johns Hopkins as a model for top-tier medical education, and it described other schools in comparison to Johns Hopkins. Some schools were called a disgrace and worse, and schools were called upon to conform to the standard or close down. Essentially, Abraham Flexner was saying, hey, we have too many medical colleges in the United States, and a lot of these schools, the work they're doing can't even be called medicine. Like, they need to close down. This report led to the merging or closure of many medical schools. The combination of our choice to start a fully functional conventional medical school, our decision to conform to the predetermined standards, and the influence of the Flexner Report led to a change in our medical educational work. And ever so slowly, we elevated the scientific standard in our schools, which is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but in hindsight, as we did that, we began to forget both our scientific and our spiritual mission. So, this is essentially what happened around the time that Loma Linda was starting. So, we talked about the denominational dilemma where the leaders of our work had to decide what type of school we were going to start at Loma Linda. Okay, and Loma Linda really set the tone for all of our other educational endeavors. Um, so, in deciding how to go ahead and implement the councils, we chose to start a full-fledged medical school. And gradually, ever so slowly, by degrees, we moved away as we had to conform to the requirements in order to maintain our accreditation and things like that. Unfortunately, we also moved away from the foundational reason for which our institution was started. So we now have all of the information that we need in order to answer the question that we posed at the beginning of this series, and we will talk more about the answer to our question in part 5. I'll be there, and I am looking forward to you being there as well. So I'll see you in part 5.